Well, if you are taking your loans, that's what we're really gonna focus on. I can see it. Chelsea, you said you're taking your loans. Teresa, you said you're taking your loans. So what I really want to talk about is what happens when you take your loans and you take too much of your loans, and you may not need it. Or the other thing that comes into play is sort of when you go to graduate school, the things people don't tell you when you take your loans at when you take your loans attempting your bachelor's degree. So always start with this slide. When I do this presentation, I've done it for adults outside of Columbus State, and I've also done it in Columbus State a few times. Um, Really, the conversation becomes where do you start and where do you go, right? And that's sort of the next conversation both of the students will have to face at some point, right? So you've made your decision to come to a 2 year community college. Both of one of, I'm sorry, you might actually be going to get an associate's degree that will allow you to move on and go and get a bachelor's and get your master's and get your PhD, or you may go the other way, right? You come to get an associate's degree that will allow you to work as soon as you leave Columbus State in a field of your choice, and thus then you can go right into the workforce. But the key is that there are always other opportunities in which sometimes I think we don't necessarily tell individuals about a degree they're receiving. So there are sometimes some next steps that you may have to do based on that degree. And sometimes, for example, when I first started to achieve my bachelor's, I wanted to be a 4 through 9 math teacher, not knowing that to be a 4 through 9 certified math teacher, at some point I was going to have to get my master's degree. At some point after my master's degree, I was going to have to take some type of continuing ed class to keep my certification. And those are usually things people don't know. And also things usually people fund by using loans. And one of the main factors that happens after you complete your bachelor's degree is if you only have federal financial aid and you're only using loans, but you may also receive the Pell Grant or grants in order to complete your bachelor's degree, you're no longer eligible for grant funding for your master's program and PhD program. So it becomes a real hard choice, especially if you're working or you're not in an assistantship. How do you pay for your grad school? Something you need to do in order to achieve whatever your life goal is. How do you pay for it? And usually the first answer is loans, right? So it becomes important that when you take your loans that you know what you're doing, because it affects your future and the potential of buying homes and cars and starting a family in the near future, even though no one tells you about it right now. So again, this conversation is not to scare you. It's more to give you more information than I ever received. Um, Growing up, I always tell people, even though I am a second generation college student, my mom went to college. I was still a first generation college student. My mom didn't have sort of the conversations or didn't know some of the things that would have been helpful to teach me. And so once I started working in higher education and was able to learn some of those things, I definitely would like to pass that knowledge on, not only to students, but even I'm a father now. So my son, my nephews, friends and family, because a lot of it is important on the steps you can take in order to stay debt free or minimum debt. Now, one of the things I really like to do, and you will, unfortunately, because we're not on campus, and I'm not sure that they're necessarily doing this in the codes class, are these value exercises. And one of the cool things about the value exercise, even though we won't go through it and make people stand up or anything of that nature or sit down, but I still like to do this just because it's important, right? One of the things that I really like about the values exercise is that it asks you questions, right? And so what it asks you questions about, for example, in this case, is a, a, questions about a job in general, and to see if you are truly interested in that job, and to understand that there are truly some values that you have to have in certain positions that you guys are going to be looking to go into, right? For example, I always think this is a good exercise because, again, when I went to school, when I went to get my bachelor's degree, I wanted to be a math teacher. It wasn't until my final year, my final semester, that I found out I did not want to be a math teacher. And that's because I didn't have those experiences to understand what it was truly going to be like to be a teacher. Once I got those experiences, I found out it was something that I did not want to do lifelong. So it's important, and what this exercise teaches you to do, and further conversation we will have today, will teach you not only to not take loans, but also look into the careers in which you're going into. Because when you have a career that you love and that you really enjoy going to work every day, it is no longer a career, it's a joy to go to. When you have something that may be a struggle to go to every day, but you need it to sustain your livelihood, it may not always be as fun to wake up and go to work. So in saying that, it becomes very important to look into what you are actually going to major in, what you're actually taking up, to make sure you really truly have the values and you're going to enjoy what you do. And so for in this case, what we will talk about is just an average career. So for example, if we were in the classroom where everybody was standing up, I would say, hey, everybody, please stand up if you would like to earn a salary of approximately $75,000 or greater, right? Please keep standing. If you want to work somewhere where you have good communication skills and you get to work with a diverse clientele, you work indoors and under direct supervision, please keep standing. You will need approximately 2 years of education beyond high school. You have to wear a uniform. And so this is where we usually see people start to sit down, right? When they say they have to wear a uniform. You will need to earn continuing education credits. You will need to feel comfortable handling smelly or potential unpleasant cases. You will have to work so close to others that you will be able to feel them breathing on you. Your work may cause physical pain to others. And again, what you will see is that as if we were in a classroom, that people would start to sit down as we got further down that list. And then there are also some people that are still standing, and you tell them, well, your job is a dental hygienist, right? And then everybody is kind of looking around, and there are some folks in there that are thinking, I don't want to be a dental hygienist, but I like the values of being a dental hygienist, right? And so that's when it becomes very important to make sure that you are literally researching what you're going to get into. Not only that, to research the values, but to research the educational fit. Understanding that some jobs you have to have more education. Teachers, for example, we work in higher education. I believe to move up the chain for me in higher education, I needed a master's degree at one point. I believe if I want to keep moving up, that I will need a PhD degree. So it becomes really important to understand how much education you will need in order to move up through your job ladder. Now, one of the other cool things that I will always state, and I had no idea Columbus State had this until I taught Coles, is this career coach. This career coach does a lot of things for students. Not only does it tell you opportunities about jobs that you may not have known, but it assesses your skills. And so it will ask you, I think one asks you about 15 to 20 questions. I think one asks you a significant amount more questions. And you get to thus then put in the information, and it will tell you jobs that fit your description. On top of that, it will also tell you how Ohio is hiring those jobs, how much those people make, how much education those people have to have for those jobs. Just the interesting stuff that you truly need to know to make a expert or a rational decision for you in order to decide what job you go into. Because for the two students and one of the first things I asked were, you taking student loans? And the reason I asked that is because if you are taking student loans, you're going to have to pay those student loans back. Now, how you pay those student loans back and how much you pay back can differ, right? But the important part is that the income you make is the income that you will use to pay those student loans back. And I can tell you a lot of people are struggling to pay their student loans, or their student loan debt affects a living or a standard of living in which the student or in which the payer or the borrower has to pay them back. And I'll give you some examples here shortly. Now, One thing I think, and it's funny, we work in higher education, and sometimes in higher education, we never really truly explain the educational pyramid and why the educational pyramid is important, right? So we always have this goal of we need to prepare you for what's right in front of you. And what's right in front of you right now is your associate's degree, right? That 2 year degree, 2 year degree to move into whatever you choose next. If that's a bachelor's degree, if that's working in working at a job after you graduate from your program of study, it becomes really important to understand that some jobs you need more than just that associate's degree, or even to move up, you will need more than just that associate's degree. There are going to be some jobs that you need a master's degree. There are going to be some jobs that you need a PhD. So it becomes really important as you guys are starting your fields of study, especially if this is even your first, second semester, even if this is your second year, that you understand the field in which you want to go to, how much education is needed for that field, and decide really is that the field you want to go to based on the education, based on the values of that job, and also to understand that the two borrowers should know it costs to get your associate's degree, it costs to get your bachelor's degree, it costs to get your master's, it costs to get your PhD, and how are you going to fund that? Because if, for example, if you're taking out all of your loans now, which is not a problem if you're using them wisely, if you're taking out all of your loans now, and you will have to thus then subsidize paying for your bachelor's degree with your loans, and subsidize paying for your master's degree with your loans, and subsidize paying your PhD with your loans, you need to make sure that you go into a field where you're going to be able to pay back those loans. And that becomes very important, because also what we don't do is research the fields we're going into and to see if it's going to fit the lifestyle in which we want to live. And that becomes very important. Everybody knows this, and this is just a simple example. I am in financial aid. That is my main responsibility in Student Central. So it becomes ever important that I kind of explain how this works, right? So both of you should know there's a cost of attendance. So there's a price for coming to the institution. That's all cost of attendance means, that you may be eligible for certain grants, federal and state, or scholarships that would take away from that cost of attendance. If there's any merit aid, departmental aid, external scholarships, things of that nature, that could also take away from that. And then lastly is that self-help aid. And that self-help aid is either aid you have to work for or aid that is borrowed and you have to pay back. It's funny because I can't see the screen, but it pops up on my watch. So the subsidized loan, unsubsidized loan are things that, again, you're going to have to pay back. A lot of people don't understand the sources of federal financial aid. And the sources of federal financial aid are the federal government, state, colleges and universities, private sources, civic organizations, and churches and employers. What I really want to focus on here is that a lot of people forget, and a lot of people never take the opportunity, especially before they start families or before they go into a job, of seeking higher education at the master's and PhD level by doing assistantships at a college institution. It's one of the coolest things that you could ever do. If I had to do it again, I would have done an assistantship where I would have gotten my PhD and my master's at the same time. I did it with my master's. I did not do it with my PhD. And pretty much what assistantships mean is they usually pay for your living expenses sometimes, but they pay for your schooling. So they pay for your master's and PhD, and thus then you work for the institution. So you don't usually pay into retirement, but you do make a reasonable amount to subsidize you working and going to school at the same time, where you actually usually don't have to take out loans or have to take out minimum loans in order to live. If you see the fact that your degree is going to take a master's degree or a PhD degree, and it's in a field where you don't need experience first to get that master's or PhD, by all means do this, right? Because those are ways to save your costs, right? To save your wallet, to save your future. And basically what it will do is it'll allow you to take out less amounts of loans. So, I mean, like business majors are good for that. A lot of times people go into education, they want to go into higher education. So that's working at somewhere like Columbus State, Kent State, that's also where I graduated from, Ohio State, all of those institutions here, really going to work at those institutions and thus then getting a degree in higher education to work at colleges. And what's really cool about working at colleges, and a lot of people actually never explain this to students, is that there are a wide variety of ways that you can work at a college. We have counselors at the college. We have business people at the college. We have individuals who are in disability services that work with students that have disabilities at the college. There's such a diversity of jobs at a college institution where even if you got that degree, you could literally go and work in higher ed. So make sure that you explore all opportunities and you start to even have conversations with people in higher education, because you never know where it will take you. For example, some of your professors could have worked in Fortune 500 companies and you have no idea. And then they chose to come and work at a higher education institution. So they have that workforce experience, and they have that experience of being a professor and a teacher, right? So understanding that the diversity of higher education is wonderful, but understanding that there are also opportunities inside of higher education that will allow you to go to school for free, because higher education institutions need workforce to help and can't sustain it by hiring all full-time staff. Sometimes they hire graduate students, sometimes they hire part-time staff. So it becomes an opportunity to definitely assist you in getting a higher education degree, such as a bachelor's, master's, and PhD. The other thing is, as you're looking for jobs, and it doesn't matter if you finish your associate's degree or you finished your bachelor's degree, look for jobs that will pay for your next degree, right? Make sure that's one of your questions when you are interviewing. Hey, do you pay for any educational expenses, right? If they say they pay for a master's and that seems like a good company, make sure you get your master's while you're at that company, right? Make sure that you use any way to subsidize that lending, or to subsidize the spending, so you don't have to pay for your college, your further college degrees. The other thing is, and what we really don't explain, and I'm sorry, I know this was supposed to be about loans and life after financial aid, but being in financial aid, I still have to make sure that you not only understand financial aid in the future, but you make sure that you understand the financial aid in which you're taking out now. Understand the direct costs and indirect costs of going to an institution. Remember that the direct costs are things like tuition fees, things that are directly charged to you from the institution. Indirect costs are totally different, right? Indirect costs are things that you didn't know you needed that you will need in order to be a successful student. So when you start to think about indirect costs, what I often tell people is, when you're going to get your bachelor's, master's, or PhD, think about things that you'll have to buy, right? So I'm working on my PhD currently. I had a computer in which I thought was going to cut it, and it didn't cut it. It just was way too slow to do the research and all the typing and everything that I was doing in order to be a great graduate student. So I had to go buy a computer, right? A new computer, an expense that I didn't think I was going to have to do in order to be in a graduate program. But it was one of the most important things, right? So what do we usually do? We usually go and buy, if you don't really care about computers, one of the cheapest computers you can find. No, make sure you understand with your indirect costs that not only are there sometimes indirect costs, but you make smart purchases that will last through whatever you're doing, right? So make sure that you don't buy a $600 computer and by the time you graduate you have to buy 3 of them, and you could have just bought an Apple or Lenovo or something like that, right? So making sure that even when you're using your loans, if you're using your loans in order to make smart purchases, that's not a problem. It's when we start to use our loans to buy those crazy indirect costs that it starts to be a problem. You don't need 5 pairs of Yeezys when you get your loan refund, right? You don't need to buy things and go to the Louis Vuitton store, the Michael Kors store, or Nordstrom, or any of the stores like that, and to buy things, right? That's when it was time to actually not use your loan, right? So it becomes very important, because what actually happens next is you have to pay back that loan, right? And no one, and even in financial aid, I would say even the federal government that does entrance counseling doesn't really explain what truly happens to a student when they use their loans. And there's nothing wrong with using your loan, but it's an understanding that you will have to pay them back. And so in these next two examples, what I will show you is how much a borrower will borrow if they borrow the maximum, I believe, if they graduate in about 5 years in student loans, what they will graduate with if they graduate with the master's. I did not do a PhD because I thought a PhD would be a little bit of overkill, but it becomes really important to understand, right? And then after that, what I'll do is I'll relate it to making income and why it's important to understand that you have to pay that loan back and what happens when you cannot pay that loan back, or that loan amount is such a large a loan amount that it starts to affect your standard of living. So, for example, in this case, the student can borrow up to $27,000 in student loans. Now, this payment isn't bad, right? So there are multiple payment plans. You can see the first one is a 120 months payment plan, so 10 years, where the student pays about $280 a month. There are graduated plans where the student pays about $157 or $472 a month. So basically what this plan allows you to do is start off at a lesser payment, banking on the fact that as you move throughout the payment plan over 10 years, that you'll have a better job and you will be able to pay more on the loan. There's also a revised payment plan where you sort of do the same thing, and it bases it on income and other things, where you'll see that there's a very interest payment. But you can see there are all types of payment plans, but you can see for the most part, they all stay in about the same range. For a master's program, let's start to look, right? Now somebody can borrow $68,000. Actually, I'm going to go back. The other part of that, what I really want you to see, and I can't circle it, so I do apologize, but for example, when you see under the standard payment plan, remember you borrowed $27,000. You will have paid the government back $33,000, right? So as you're borrowing, start to look at the amount that you actually would have paid the government back because you took out such a big amount. Now, we can also do this with graduate school. So if you go to graduate school, you graduate, let's say in 2 years, this could be the maximum that you could take out. But look how it skyrocketed, right? So the student had $27,000 of debt. They now have $68,000 of debt. But look at those payments, right? So you can see the first one is $735. That graduated one is $417 and more than $1,200 on the back end, right? Extended payment plans where it's over the 120 months and moves to 300 months is $400, right? But look at the amount that you're paid back. The student who would go into the extended payment plan, who borrowed $68,000, would now pay back over $124,000, right? The person who goes into the graduated payment plan, who borrowed $68,000, will pay $93,000 back. Let's also start to look at the extended graduated plan, where the student will pay around $300 to $600, but pay back over $135,000, right? And this is where I start to explain that what you borrow now starts to affect that, right? So if you can lessen some of the amount that you borrow, not only while you're achieving and attempting your associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and master's degree, the amount that you actually have to pay back lessens too, right? Now, I think one of the hard things is to explain what this all truly means. And so basically what I did a few years ago was I asked students what they believed they had to pay and how a paycheck of $45,000 actually worked for a student. So I believe 48 is about the minimum. I won't even say minimum. I'm sorry. The average a student makes once they graduate with an associate's, bachelor's degree. So what I did was I broke that down for the student. So what you will get is about $3,750 a month. Understanding that the government takes out their cut first, FICA taxes, Medicare taxes, and if you're in a state that has state taxes, they take their chunk first. So what you can see is now what you actually have is around $2,915.45. So what I asked students really to do was to explain to me what they thought they had to pay and how much they pay a month. So students gave me very general expenses, right? Insurance, electric, car payment, rent, gas, water. And that came out to be about over $1,800. So that left the student after they pay bills with about $1,100 or so. Now, when we start to think and look back at someone who thus has borrowed $700, that leaves you with about $400 to live with a month. And what's even scarier is I ask people to give me a list. This list does not include some of the things you actually need to live, right? Doesn't include transportation, doesn't include food, it doesn't include debt payments, right? It doesn't include healthcare, it doesn't include entertainment, apparel, services, childcare. So you could see that taking out a lot could really truly affect your income. Now, what I also did, and I wish Jack Popovich would have been here because he's a good person to really talk to about personal finance, and I believe he does a personal finance class, or is still one of the founding, I would say, professors who made the personal finance class. And I would suggest if you can take that personal finance class, because it becomes really important to truly understand what it is to create wealth and what you need to do in order to sustain wealth, right? Because what I also wanted to do was to make sure people understood what a finance expert, and I won't say finance expert, I Googled literally to find out what Google and websites say that you should save and do. Oh, sorry about that. I have a Google device and it came on. But I look to see what you should actually spend your paycheck on, right? And 30% of that, your paycheck should be on housing, 10% utilities and housing expenditures, 15% food, 10% transportation, savings, clothing, entertainment, car insurance, and discretionary fund. Now, we're going to do one more exercise, and I hope that this exercise will hopefully drive the budget home. No, none of you want to live where it costs about $800 to live, right? And so what this should explain and what this teaches people is that you actually have to move that $2,915 check around to what you feel is the most important if you're living by yourself, right? If you're married, it may be a bigger income, but if you're living by yourself and you have to sustain by yourself, what becomes important to you really starts to matter, right? Again, you don't want to live where it's $800. You may want to live somewhere where it's $1,200 or $1,300, right? But that $1,300 has to come from somewhere out of your paycheck. You either have to move something up, you got to move something down, you got to eat out less, you may not be saving. But the other part of that, right, is really the importance of understanding what may eat up a large chunk of that is how much you have to pay the federal government back because of the loan amount you took, right? Because that becomes a payment that you have to pay, right? Or they start to garnish tax returns, right? They start to garnish wages. It does take a while, but they will garnish that amount. So it becomes ever important to understand that at the end run, when someone says don't take student loans, this is what they're talking about, right? The end result of the fact that it may truly, truly affect your income that you actually get to see and use to pay housing and things of that nature. I want to show one other thing. I'm trying to be as quick as possible just because I think this conversation always warrants people having a additional conversation. But I do want to, where is it? Okay. So I also like to show this, right? And so what I also do is I take, and I wish we were on campus because on campus, this is a really cool activity. I tell the person to dream big, right? And so usually I bring a student up and I say, dream big and tell me what type of house or car you want or anything of that nature. So usually what we do is we'll say we want to live in, this would be the Bexley area code, right? And so then I have people find where they want to live in Bexley and they'll choose a house and things of that nature. So again, what's really interesting, right, is that this is a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with about 1,900 square feet in Bexley is over $500,000. Or, I'm sorry, yes, over $500,000, right? And what's even more interesting is the monthly payment, right? And so what we really start to do is dive into sort of the cars and the things that people want, right? And so, for example, this is my dream car. I'm going to get it one day, I promise. This in a Tesla. Oh, does this one not do it? Oh no, I can't find it. But usually we look up the cars and then they tell us how much the car is going to be per month. And thus then we put it into this nice calculator. But today I'm just going to give you an example of what they say the average person spends now a month. So again, they spend about $1,600 in housing. If they buy their own house, they spend over $600 in utilities, $500 in food, and that's just grocery store. That doesn't count going out to eat. Clothing, spent about $145. I stole that from Ohio. Healthcare, spent about $414. Entertainment, $269. Personal care, $65. Miscellaneous expenses, so just like gadgets and things they want to buy, over $169. We're not going to say that they save anything right now. Transportation and school if they have kids. And what was really interesting, I will say, about the food was that was for 2.5 people. I don't know how they got the 2.5 people. I didn't know you could have half a person in your house. You either have a whole or none. But that was for 2.5 people. So this is just a two-person household, right? Loans, we're not going to put anything for loans, right? So as we start to hit finish and we start to get an estimate, look at how much you need to make in order to live this type of lifestyle, right? Now, what usually happens is we've lived in Bexley, we drive a Tesla and things of that nature, and we truly get to see it takes a lot to do that, right? And does the career you're going into sustain that lifestyle, right? And my key is if it does not sustain that lifestyle, it's not to say that you can't have it. The key is that you need to make sure that you don't borrow so you don't have things that affect the way you want to live later. So again, this is kind of hard to do in the teams world, but I just wanted to give you an example. The other part of that is, right, just seeing this example, as you guys have time, I know you're a college student, understanding that I'm telling you it's going to take about $65,000 to have a home that's about $1,600 a month to spend $500 in groceries. Now, also start to see the career path you want to go to when you start out, make that much, right? So understanding that the career path you choose also builds the lifestyle you want, right? And there are other ways that you may have to do or that you may do in order to sustain your lifestyle of living. For example, you may have to save a different way. So you may not get to enjoy the luxuries of a BMW when you're 21, 22, 23, but you're sustaining a lifestyle because you're starting to save and do things when you're 35, 36, 37. The other part of that, right, is notice that I didn't put that the person was saving anything or even put loans in there, right? So it becomes ever more important to understand that you really, really have to be careful what you borrow. All right, let me get back to my PowerPoint. So I just have a few more slides and then I'll take any questions. I really like the question part because I feel that may be the part that you really get to address some of the things that you really, really, truly want to know. I mean, it was not something that I got to do in undergraduate, and I wish I would have. So I would say, again, if you have any questions, make sure that you ask me today. And if I can't get you the answer, I will definitely try to get you the answer. I wouldn't be a financial aid person if I did not explain scholarships, right? And the scholarship opportunities at Columbus State. After having this conversation, again, you should apply for scholarships as much as you can at Columbus State. That is free money, right? The more you can get in scholarships, the less you can take in loans. What's really cool about our scholarships at Columbus State is we offer something that will tell you the scholarships you're eligible for instead of you searching all of the scholarships. So you put in some information about yourself, and thus we tell you the scholarships you're eligible for. Don't forget to use fastweb.com, and also don't forget the Columbus Foundation. Columbus Foundation, I think, is one of the underused sort of sources for scholarships that people often forget, and they do some really cool stuff. Just understanding again, federal government, state, college, university, private sources, civic organizations, employers, and churches, financial aid. Again, I wanted to quickly come back to this because it becomes ever more important, right? As you understand what you are what happens when a student borrows too much, as I hope I was able to give an example of with sort of what I could do right now. It becomes ever important to understand if you're eligible for pretty much everything except self-help aid, right? And that you make sure you utilize things such as scholarships, opportunities, assistantship in order to cut down some of that borrowing because it does help, right? The more you borrow, the more at this point you will have to pay back. So that becomes ever important for people to understand. And again, understanding what institution and how the institution offers this funding is ever important, right? Because, for example, if you come to Columbus State, we don't necessarily have a FAFSA deadline. So if you're eligible for our institutional aid, you're eligible for it as long as you fill whatever the requirements out or fill out the requirements before the semester ends or before the year ends, right? Places like Ohio State have deadlines, right? Now, they may not cut you off from federal aid, but they will cut you off from their institutional aid because they have so many students that need that aid where they have to make a deadline. So it becomes ever important to understand that. Assistantships, there are deadlines for assistantships, right? That you have to make sure that you take your testing for, you have to sign up for, you have to interview for. So you need to make sure that you meet that criteria and apply and do whatever. Even employers, when they have tuition reimbursement and things of that nature, usually there may be an open enrollment period and things of that nature that you truly need to understand and keep a watchful eye on so you don't miss out on the opportunity. I actually didn't do bad. I always try to leave about 15 minutes for questions or sometimes even an opportunity to think about some of this stuff. But I cannot stress enough, if you haven't done that career coach, make sure you do the career coach because that's an important tool. And I wish I actually would have had that in undergraduate, as well as asking me some questions, asking me some things that you're concerned about, discussing some things that you're seeing, and asking even Jeff, hopefully he'll answer too, some tips about going and getting a master's or a PhD or going to get a bachelor, working at an institution or working a job, things that you wish or we wish we could have told you or somebody would have told us. Ask those questions in our last 13 minutes. But before that, just so you know, it's a little different right now, but my office, Student Central, where you can ask all types of questions, and we not only do financial aid, but we do workshops, we do registration questions, we help fill out forms, even though most of that right now is technically through either chat or over the phone. Sometimes we do workshops through Collaborate, where you have the opportunity to speak with us, answer questions, do whatever you definitely need to do in order to complete what you need to complete. So for example, if that's registration, we can help you with registration. If it's completing financial aid forms, please make sure when we get back on campus that you visit us on campus. If not, make sure you call us at this point at 287-5353. We have a finaid@cscc email. If you go on to the website at cscc.edu and you search the chat or you search Student Central, there's a chat function. But ask us the questions that you truly need to ask and make sure that you get the services you need in order to be successful as early, as often as you need. So in the back end, you're only worried about your academics.